Welcome to the show brought to you by the National Association of Youth Organizations in partnership with the National Association of Non-Governmental Organizations in Zimbabwe and the Zimbabwe Human Rights Monitors platform. This is a show where we look at a CSO enabling environment, particularly with regards to do with CSOs working in and around Zimbabwe. So today with me on the show, I have two amazing guests that have been working in civic society for quite a long time. And their areas of focus are quite different. So that will add to a more in-depth discussion and development rather. So welcome Nompilo, welcome Mr. Chivheya to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome, I feel like. So if you don't mind, maybe Nompilo, I'll start with you. Please introduce yourself to the people that are watching and tell us about the work that you do, particularly with your non-governmental organization.
Okay. So I come from an organization called YIELD. It's an acronym for Youth-Led Innovative Engagement with Leadership and Development. We are a youth-led and youth-focused organization that is based in Malawi, and we do a bit of work also in Matabele South. Our work primarily is on promoting meaningful youth engagement in policy and developmental issues. And we do this through means such as capacitating young people with the knowledge and the skills to be able to engage, whether it's their duty bearers or it's the society at large.
Okay, so I will come back to you and then we'll delve in deeper into the work that you do.
Okay.
I just want to give Mr. Chivheya the opportunity to also just, in a short summary, just introduce yourself and the work that your organization does. But we'll delve deeper into the work of both your organizations because I understand that you will really have an extensive reach in your organizations and you've made quite a lot of impact, particularly with regards to young people and ordinary citizens as well. Mr. Chivheya.
Thank you so much, Unika. I am from the organization called the Center for Democracy and Peace Advocacy. So basically the organization deals with governance, human rights and peace building issues. So we have what we call peace action advocacy committees.
Wow.
Yes, so what do? They identify potential conflict issues in their communities, conflict resolution, and also lobbying and advocacy in terms of engaging the relevant authorities depending on the issues that they come across in their communities. So basically that's what we do. Human rights issues as well. We do the monitoring and documentation of human rights issues. And then sort of do advocacies in terms of engaging relevant authorities.
So that's really very extensive. So I like that you focus on youth and then you focus more on really just generally everybody in society. So Nompilo, I understand that the country has been making quite a lot of strides in ensuring that young people are a part of developmental conversations, are a part of making sure that the country really moves in the direction whereby young people are in decision-making platforms and they're also actively participating in civic society or rather in civic engagement. So could you tell me more about the work that you as an organization particularly do with regards to young people and civic participation?
Alright, so as an organization, we capacitate young people with the knowledge and the skills to be able to effectively engage duty bearers, to effectively engage whether it's their member of parliament, it's their councillors. We want them to be aware there's a constituency development fund, there's a wide rotation fund, there's devolution funds, and to be able to be in a position to ask the hard questions on how are those funds being spent. Have youth been prioritized in those areas? We want youth to turn up at consultations and be able to not just be counted in just the numbers, but in terms of the contributions that they're making to the conversations or to whatever bills that are in the process of being approved by people.
Yeah.
So that's primarily our work. We want the dialogues, we want the conversations, but importantly, we want them to be more than just a ticking the box kind of thing. We want them to be meaningful and to come from an informed point of view.
I like that. I love the meaningful engagement part of thing. To participate in a platform, it's another to be able to meaningfully do that. So Mr. Chivheya, with your work, you primarily deal with peace. And a lot of people would argue that Zimbabwe is a very peaceful country. What are your thoughts towards that?
Yes, yeah. I've often met people that have said Zimbabwe is at peace. But however, peace is a very broad term. So hence you hear of positive peace and negative peace. Whereby negative, let me start by positive peace.
Yes.
Positive peace is that kind of peace where people are enjoying all their fundamental rights. Where people are enjoying their socio-economic rights, their political rights, and so on. Whereas negative peace is this kind of peace that a lot of people talk about when they say Zimbabwe is at peace. It is absence of physical violence, but presence of structural and cultural violence, where people are not free to express themselves.
So, Mr. Chivheya, I like how you brought in the aspect of negative peace, particularly in Zimbabwe. And you guys, having worked in the civic society space for so long, and particularly within communities where you capacitate different people to be able to demand for transparency and accountability for their leaders. And in a politically volatile context like the one that we find ourselves in Zimbabwe, that cannot be easy. So maybe, Mr. Chivheya, you can take us through, do you think that there are immediate threats to CSOs, particularly the ones that are currently operating in the Zimbabwean environment?
Yes, I think there are serious threats, more on, especially on organizations that deal with governance, human rights, and peace-building issues. For instance, we've seen the recent passing of the Patriotic Bill, and we've also seen the PVO bill, which is still hanging somewhere there. That bill that is hanging there is also causing a lot of uncertainty in terms of the operations of CSOs, and the Patriotic Bill as well is limiting the freedoms of people in terms of expressing themselves in communities. And lately we've also noted that when you are sort of going to notify the police for holding meetings and so forth, they've sort of upped their game. We used to leave our papers there for notification, and then we go and collect the papers, and the peace department would then send about a rep or two to our meetings. But this time around, I had an experience where I later also got a call from the president's office, which shows that the level of surveillance on the CSO work has reached another level.
Yeah.
So it means we cannot people cannot express themselves freely. Even that presence of police officers at meetings, it also affects the way people can then partake in different programs
And express
themselves in communities.
Nompilo, what are your thoughts on that?
I think the current operating environment is certainly hostile, depending on the type of work that you're doing, like Mr. Chivheya has already highlighted. If you're doing work that's involving governance issues and related human rights issues, it's often very hostile. It's difficult to navigate. Like I've also had an encounter whereby we were simply hosting a sports tournament, but we had also dubbed it like a peace sports tournament, where we just want to speak about peace issues and speak about how, as we're going towards the elections, we want women especially to be safe during that time. But that meeting could not happen, well, because of the political environment, because we're also headed towards elections, then everything gets to be associated with the political party.
Sure.
We are here in this particular area, and maybe in this particular instance, it's either ZANU or CCC has a stronghold, and then it then seems as if you're mobilizing for a political party or to push for a certain agenda, which is not what our work is about as CSOs. Our work is simply to demand accountability and transparency, like you said, and to complement government's efforts, importantly. So it doesn't become easier when you're working within that particular environment that seems to have a lot of hostility towards it. And sometimes there's even surveillance on people that work for CSOs. So it becomes difficult. Sometimes you're seeing people following you, or you feel like continually even your family members are being monitored and watched. So I wouldn't say it's a very kind environment for people that are delving into human rights and governance issues.
So we know of a certain regulation whereby Zimbabwe, I guess, is also a signatory to, particularly the Financial Action Task Force recommendation number 8, that speaks to the need for there to be some sort of regulation with regards to the work that civic society does, to the activities that it does and how it is governed, the purposes of their work, and so on and so forth. What do you particularly think with regards to accountability of civic society organizations, particularly looking at Zimbabwe? Do you think CSOs need to be regulated? If so, how? If not, why?
Well, the Financial Action Task Force recommendation, I think, has made us to really think about a lot of things in terms of how we work as the CSO space. Not very welcome, I would say, initially. There was a lot of resistance to it, but I think it's really made us to stop and start to think about issues such as self-regulation. How do we self-regulate, and how do we put our house in order? Because as much as it might not be everyone who's necessarily engaging in uncouth activities that might call for such, yes, there might be a few, but we then get painted with one brush gradually. So there is always need to then go back to say how best as a sector do we comply. How best as a sector do we put our house in order, so much that when we're working with government, even government has no room to say, hey, we are shutting you down on the basis of this. So as much as, well, there've been a lot of mixed feelings around, is it really true? Is it really necessary to say the Financial Action Task Force has pushed for this kind of recommendation? But I think ultimately it's helped us to start fixing our things. Maybe that's possibly why the bill is still hanging over our heads. That might be one of the reasons, because we've been trying to put our house into order.
So part of, I guess, the mandate of civic society organizations, particularly non-governmental organizations, is that they are free from any sort of influence of the government. though they do abide by the laws of the nation, by the laws provided in the Constitution, but they are free from political interference. Doesn't such a recommendation then lead to a gap that governments can take advantage of and start politically interfering with regards to non-governmental organizations? And I ask this understanding the context that Zimbabwe is in terms of the lack of human rights respect by the government. When we look at more and more African countries that do not have strengthened capacities in government, but also that have really no respect for rule of law and human rights, do we then expect or accept that such a recommendation would work in context such as Zimbabwe? Mr. Chivheya?
Yes, that's a very good question. So, just like what you have said, the kind of recommendation that we are talking about actually kills the essence of what kills the roles of civil society to some extent. Where you get a scenario where government, through the relevant ministry, line ministry, can be able to maybe at one point dissolve a board of a CSO and then put its own people to run the organization for a while. So it kills that checks and balance role of civil society on government. Because if government itself then places a board to run a CSO, how then does that CSO play that checks and balance role?
True.
And we've also heard of scenarios where you are supposed to declare, for instance, where you get your funding and other things. So all those kind of things, I think they kill the actual purpose of CSOs. At the end of the day, CSOs are no longer playing the role that they are supposed to be playing.
I think, you can...
If I may also add, I also wanted to speak about organizations within the civil society space that, for example, focus on key populations, already marginalized groups whose work is already very high risk, that the recommendation itself poses an even bigger risk to those particular groups. You're already dealing with maybe groups that the law of Zimbabwe refuses to recognize, most importantly. So it becomes difficult to be able to report on each and every activity that you want to do, how much funding you have, and how you want to go about your activities to the very government that you want to lobby to and advocate, towards. So it's a very tricky instance, but I think it needs limitations. It's not exactly an entirely bad thing to be able to monitor, but there should certainly be limitations to how much monitoring can take place within the CSO space.
Yeah, just to also quickly add to what accountability and monitoring, like what Nompilo is saying, is very necessary. But it shouldn't reach a point where it actually ends up affecting the operations of CSOs and NGOs. And from what we have also gathered is that this financial action task force, these recommendations also depend on the contexts of different countries. It should come, they call it the risk-based approach. Action task force puts the recommendations, but as a country we then look at ourselves and analyze the risks. Are we really having serious issues of money laundering or terrorism? So that we can then put that information to CSOs and the public to see that we are justified if we are implementing the following.
And if government is really genuine about the money laundering, perhaps let's see them deal with the gold mafia first.
Yes.
And then
So
we can see that it can extend to the CSOs.
to CSOs,
But we've seen people whom the spotlight has been on. What's happened?
there is nothing that is happening. Serious issues of money laundering. I mean, of the gold mafia issues.
Illicit financial flows.
Yes.
Kind of very interesting turn of conversations. So the National Association of Youth Organizations, in partnership with the National Association of Non-Governmental Organizations, has been holding forums to convene local CSOs across Zimbabwe. How important do you think such forums are to the work of CSOs across Zimbabwe? Nompilo?
I think we cannot overstate or overemphasize how important they are. Like I said, part of what these forums have been doing is to have us introspect. Doesn't necessarily mean we've been doing anything wrong, but it's been a space to start to think about, perhaps we've always known we need to do this, but over time maybe we've just relaxed in going about it the proper way. So it's a space also to say, let's self-regulate. Yeah, let's self-regulate. Before we say government is coming in, let's put our house in order. And I think these forums have been very important in also saying what are the challenges within the CSO space and how best do we deal with them. Before we bring in another party, even if it's government, how best do we deal with them in-house? So much that they don't become a weakness towards our space, for our space to be shut down. So I think these forums have certainly been important. Also, because part of the conversation has been on maybe we should have our own code of conduct as the civic society space that governs how we go about our work. And I think that's important.
So, Mr. Chivheya, what would you say is your message, the message that you'd like to leave for the people, particularly those in civic society organizations who live and work in the context that we find ourselves in?
Yes, my message with regards to the context that we find ourselves in as CSOs is that let's continue to comply as much as we can to the regulatory mechanisms that are there. The government, regulatory mechanisms. For instance, PVOs have to submit reports, monthly reports and other things. But let's also try to find ways of navigating and continuing with working with communities. Because we find that even if the space is getting smaller and smaller, but let's think outside the box as well and find other platforms where we can still express ourselves. I was at a certain meeting where we even spoke about maybe, just as an example, using churches as a platform, especially for some of us who are into governance, peace and human rights. You can, through churches, you can be able to get some space to express or to disseminate some messages of peace and human rights and governance. So I'm just giving this as an example to say, while we comply with everything, but we also have to think outside the box so that we still remain relevant as CSOs.
Interesting. Innovation, and more innovation. So thank you very much, Nompilo and Mr. Chivheya, for making time and just coming here to have this conversation with us, because it's such a very important conversation to have, particularly in Zimbabwe, where a lot of people depend on the work of civic society and non-governmental organizations. So thank you very much for coming through.
Thank you for having us.
Unika. Thank you.
So for those of you that are watching, thank you also for making time and for beginning this show with us, and then now we're just at the end. But thank you very much for being here with us. We look forward to hearing your comments about the show, about really the topic that we're discussing today. This has been your host, Unika, in Themba Kombora. This Saturday.
Shungu, Themba.